Hi everyone, today I'd like to talk to you about what makes a great photo reference for painting on canvas. We're going to be doing a landscape study in class, so I want to give you some examples of photography that works well to paint from. And for this unit, we're going to be taking a look at some of these paintings by the artist Toby Mendez. Toby is actually a famous sculptor, but recently he's been doing some gorgeous paintings on canvas. Now, I just love how these images capture the realistic feel of the scene and the lighting and the color, and yet they're beautifully playful with brushwork and texture. Notice how in this image you can see the thickness of the paint on the bottom. You can also see the beautiful blend of colors in the clouds and the sky. And we are focusing on a technique here called implied detail. Basically, this means we are adding less details than we would normally see in a photo so that the viewer will fill in those details as they look at the image. It's your brain that is going to recognize familiar things and fill in that extra information. Notice when we zoom out and see this from a thumbnail point of view, it's very crisp and accurate and realistic. And then as we zoom in and see all of the detail of this painting, you can notice that you see the thickness of the brushwork. You see the paint qualities more than just the realistic details you might see if this were a photo. Let's capture the beauty of paint as we select our photos. So to do that, we want to choose a composition that is not too complicated. We want to choose an image that we can scale down to a small size. We're going to be painting on a relatively small canvas, so we need to have a composition that's relatively simple. Now, not every single photo you take has to be this gorgeous, epic scene to be a beautiful painting. This is Yosemite Valley. You can't not take a good picture of this. But we don't need something quite like this to be successful. Let's first take a look at some photos that are not the greatest to use as a reference. I'm seeing a lot of images like this in our area. This is a beautiful view looking out over some mountains, but notice how the majority of this composition is made up of all these trees. Look at how many branches there are. Now, I don't know about you, but I would really hate to have to paint this. There are some artists that love doing that kind of detail, but we're just doing a study here. We don't want to have a painting that's going to take us weeks to complete. So avoid images with just too much detail, too many branches and trees and structures that you would have to paint. This image also has some similar problems. Notice how many trees there are. That can be problematic. But our goal with the landscape is to see the land. I really don't see much sense of distance here other than that road going back into the distance and a little glimpse of some distant land back there. But there's not much sky in this composition, and to be honest, the road going straight back into the distance is something we've seen in a lot of beautiful photography. It's a little bit less original. This is a gorgeous view from, I believe it's High Rock, and these are really wonderful places to experience. However, for the purposes of this landscape painting, there's nothing in the foreground. We have nothing up close to paint. Basically, everything in this image is background. So we're going to avoid an image without anything up close. This is a beautiful sky, and a moment like this, in real life, our eyes would be able to see the land and the sky at the same time, but a camera cannot. Notice how the land in this image is almost pure black. This is a silhouette. This is really a painting of a sky, not a landscape. So I would avoid an image like this where the land is not really a part of the composition, and especially because there isn't much detail to see here. A photo like this might work pretty well. I mean, these are just some open fields, some trees. We have a field, another row of trees further back, and then into the distance we can see these beautiful mountains and also a lovely sky. Notice the nice sense of lighting as well. We have beautiful cast shadows in that field. Around this area, we're going to see lots of valleys and barns and houses and buildings, and that can be a wonderful thing to paint. Buildings can be in the composition as long as they're relatively simple. If you look at these barns, there are a couple of basic shapes, and due to the lighting, we can really see areas of highlight, shadow, and midtone. So something like this could really work. Now notice how this image does have a few distractions. We can see the silo off to the left, we see the power lines across the top, and we see these little poles across the bottom. Now when you paint, you can just simply choose not to paint those things. We can leave them out. There's enough information in this photo to just paint as if they're not even there. The other thing we can do later is when we edit the photo, we could simply crop a little bit closer to remove distractions. This is the photo reference that I chose to work from as an example, unedited, and this is the edited copy. Notice how the colors are a little bit brighter, a little bit more contrast, and I'm cropped in tighter. Let's analyze this photo. Okay, so first of all, when we take a look at the rule of thirds, I can see a strong horizontal is always going to be around that horizon line. I also see another horizontal right here, pretty close to the bottom 1/3 line. So each of these areas is 1/3 approximately. So breaking up your image into thirds is a great way to start. You really don't want to move the horizon down to the bottom 1/3 line here, because if you do that, then that is going to make this image 2/3 sky and only 1/3 land. I would suggest a horizon line closer to that top 1/3 line. Now notice if we add in the vertical 1/3 lines, there's not much happening there on the left, but on the right we can see at this intersection point where the row of fence posts are intersecting with that bottom 1/3 line. So this brings the viewer's eye into the composition really well. So let's take a look at what makes this photo an interesting reference for a painting. Overall, compositionally it works, but to me some of the things that really drew me in is the texture along the bottom where these weeds are. We have this row of fence posts moving back into the distance, drawing our eye into the composition. We have some really nice shades of green all scattered throughout this, but more importantly to me, I really love the sense of depth of land that this has. There's also a really beautiful sense of overlapping, slightly diagonal shapes. So we have the diagonal of the fence post first. We have this line right here. And then as we look at the edges of these fields and these different areas, we have some lovely shapes adding to the composition. Even these clouds, if you kind of notice the bottoms of them, move in a slightly diagonal direction. So these overlapping shapes with the counterpoint of the fence posts and the texture on the bottom really makes this a nice composition, and I have nice little areas to paint. I even like how the shadows of the clouds are showing right on the mountain.